Hi, everybody. Um, uh, Layla, are you able to link up with me with my pictures? I know we didn't have an opportunity to practice before. Are we good?
Yep, I'm ready.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. I'm going to begin with a word that I always use when I do a talk, whether it's students or publicly. Been doing a lot of talking for a lot of years, but I hope I've done some listening too. Um, the word is, and if Layla, if you'd show the picture, please, for us. Um, is it there? I can't see it on the screen share. Good, okay. Then we'll move on to the first picture slide with the picture. There we go, the talking stick. And the word I'd like to teach you is the word ababare. It's from the Tupi language of southern Ecuador. It's one of the countries in which I've spent a portion of my life doing research and working with folks in service. And it's what I use to open every class, every talk I've given, whether it's Rotary or a church or just group of women getting together. So I'll say it once, and then would you say it after? I'll say it once, I'll tell you what it means, and then I'll ask you to either think it, say it, or whisper it maybe. Ababare means good morning, good afternoon, welcome to my world. I love you, I care about you. It's an all-purpose word that's used throughout the day. It's one of the most frequent words you'll hear among the people who do speak Tupi in southern Ecuador. So please join me in saying it. Ababare. Thanks. So my talk today is about experiencing spirituality through service, and I added the subtitle, Doors Will Open. And to tell you about it, I want to use some of my own stories and encourage you to think about your own. A little bit of background about what I'm going to say in my next 20 minutes. I retired officially from Michigan State in May, but I'm still teaching. And I'm coordinating an ethical leadership program, and I'm advising a program in microfinance. So I'm not exactly sitting around eating chocolates with my feet up. My research and service have been in fair trade, microfinance, organics, cooperatives, and related topics. It's all about grassroots tools of sustainability. I'm a teacher in my heart and soul, and I realize that being a teacher has given me the gift and continues to give me the gift of being in a position to be able to serve. It gives me the platform. And while my talk is about a teacher who serves, I'm keenly aware that most of you in this call serve in your own way, and a lot of you are teachers. Maybe we should say everyone is a teacher at some point during every day of our lives. So I'm currently in transition. The micro side of things for me is, who am I? How can I continue to contribute in a world in this time of major transition? And I'm certainly asking that of myself every day. The macro, in community, locally, nationally, and across our world, we're all in transition in this time. As Janet said on October 18th here, standing where I'm standing now, when she spoke of her spiritual connections with Hawaii, there are some magical things, and that's a theme for me in my life, and that's a theme for what I want to talk about today. So when I look at my life so far, not back, I'm not old, I'm just continuing. It feels like things have been magical when I've experienced patience and when I've waited for doors to open. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about it. And my thought is that, like, my thought about all of this is it's like floating on water. Okay, I'm a swimmer. I love to swim, but I know when I was learning to swim when I was a kid, if I flailed and grasped, and we all know this about people who are drowning. I had to save somebody once who was on the verge. She would have drowned in the pool had I not jumped in. I waste energy, and if I float, it comes to me. And I've done my share of flailing and grasping, but I know that if I float and wait, it's much more magical and things do come to me. Where am I supposed to be going now? There are myriad ways we express our spirituality. In this group, we do guided journeying, we do meditation, drumming, music, singing, playing instruments, stories, writing, poetry. And my topic here is about letting ourselves be guided to service as a way of experiencing spirituality. So I'm going to divide the remaining comments into three sections. First, the concept of service has been encircling me throughout my life, but really lately in this time of transition for me. Secondly, I want to talk a little bit about being guided to service and how doors have opened. I have dozens and dozens of stories that I could tell. Everything's a story. This necklace is a story. My talking stick is a story. And as Rob said recently here in one of our sessions, everyone has a story. So I'm going to share snippets of a few of mine. And then thirdly, to close, I'll come back to my opening words. I'm in my own transition. We are in the world in the transition. And service is a way that we can experience our spiritual nature as we work for a new direction for the world. So, some context. As I said, the concept that service is a way to experience spirituality is the way I experience spirituality has been circling me. I can't define spirituality for you, but I can tell you this is one piece of it. Some of our recent speakers have brought this to all of us here since we've entered this time of transition under COVID. Our Quaker speaker on Easter Sunday conveyed the following message. He said, quote, "Each act of service is a prayer that others will do the same." Well, in my over 38 years of teaching, and actually I've been a teacher since I was 14 when I started teaching younger kids how to play the violin. I'm a violinist too. I've been telling my students this for all of my teaching career. When you feel overwhelmed by the challenges, environmental, climate change, social inequity, and economic inequity, even if it's a small thing, do it and trust others to do their own thing. I try to help my students explore ways to take action. I try not to just introduce them to a litany of problems. And I've tried to do the same thing in my own life. Can't let myself get overwhelmed because then nothing gets done. And I know that a lot of people in this group practice that quietly without fanfare. And it's visibly through avenues here at Interfaith, such as through the service committee, focusing on service in our own community. Well, my own call to service has been local in teaching, but it's also been very international. Okay. So another example, Sunday, April 16th, our message was about dealing with fear in the time of pandemic from our own Delith. And her three recommendations that came out that day were, remember the spiritual is constant. Get yourself in a good place. And then serve, do something for others. I've been doing classes, our meditation and Sufi classes with Imam Kamau Ayubi this Tuesday night. We've talked a lot about service and the importance of giving and sharing with others in Islam. And as a good friend of mine reminded me recently, she said, Paulette, remember, I start each day with, quote, how can I serve? It's my friend Mo's way of explicitly opening herself to being guided. So here are a few stories about this. I've selected from many stories. Each relates to a transition, or whether they're big transitions, retiring, or leaving, and changing a job, or little ones. At least in retrospect, I realized I was guided. Doors were opened for me. I didn't do it myself, and doors opened and facilitated a chain of events. And I'll give you a few examples. When I say guided, I mean I was not in control. Okay, so I can't give you a theologian's explanation of spirituality, but here are some examples of what I feel it has been in my life through the service doors that have been opened to me. My work in Spanish and work with Indigenous people. Since a little kid, I was fascinated by Indigenous people. Wrote papers about it. I still have my junior high school and high school papers about it. I took a 101 Spanish class just because it filled my schedule, second semester of Spanish of my freshman year. And I had a girlfriend going to Mexico on a brand new program that was a combination of study and service. And I made an appointment to talk to the professor doing it, and that was before internet, of course, and so, but I couldn't go. I knew I couldn't go. I went out of courtesy to tell him, and he said, why can't you go? A, I don't have any money. B, you have to have 2 semesters of Spanish, and I'd only had 1. Well, he said, you got a full scholarship, get yourself down there. So that set me on my path. I later found out I was in an experimental Spanish class, and they didn't tell me until later, but I'd passed out of 4 semesters of Spanish in 1. I think I had a path that I was supposed to follow. In this rapid succession, I took to Spanish like duck to water, and our program in Mexico included service. I helped, after my first summer there, I was hired as a student assistant for the next 3 summers, and I led a program, here's my swimming again, teaching little kids. We got the use of the 68 Olympic Trial Complex. It was normally open to people who were wealthy. It cost, at that time, the equivalent of $1 US. Well, that might as well have been $100 to kids on the street. And we had little boys who shined shoes and little girls girls who sold roses. We got to teach these kids. And I don't care if they learned it swimming in it. These kids had the time of their lives, and we did too, getting to know them. Lots of stories connected with that. And then that got me to Columbia. I begged my way into sophomore, 6 months in Columbia in sophomore year instead of junior year, and that's what got me the position of student assistant for the next three summers. So it was my thing. Dropped my chemistry major and on with my French, Spanish, and music. Well, jumping ahead many years, leaving out a lot of stories, some more stories. I was working at a law firm, and it just wasn't a good fit. Their ethics, what I try to define as values and moral principles, and I teach ethical leadership, just didn't match mine. And I was uncomfortable. And by chance, I happened to one time only go down to the library at Wayne State University, where I'd gone to law school, and doing some research, and it happened to be the placement office was temporarily located there, and I'm sitting in a study carrel across from that temporary office and over here. It's a great position here, really great position. Somebody's going to be interested. Perk up my ears, go walking in, and found this position at two positions at MSU, a tenure stream and a year-to-year. Well, I put in my application, I did the interview, I came home and I'm thinking, me teaching in a college of business, the environmentalist, the social activist, I don't know. But meanwhile, not counting on that job at all, about 2 weeks later, I ended up quitting the job. I'd never quit a job except to go back to school or to take another job in my life, but I quit that job. It just wasn't the right fit. And I went home, was preparing to apply for unemployment, and I got a call from the dean at MSU's business school 2 weeks later, and he said, you got the position. I'm not supposed to tell you, but you got it. Anyway, so that was 38 years ago. I took the position. I learned that it was a pretty amazing thing that I got it because I was so naive, I didn't realize people applied all over the world, or not over the world, but all over the country, and they'd do assistant and lecturing and whatever before they got a tenure stream position. Lo and behold, I got the tenure stream position out of 600 applicants. Holy cow. Okay. So I took the position even though my friends told me, you the environmentalist, what are you doing at business college? And my perspective was I wouldn't be preaching to the choir. And believe me, to this day, I'm not preaching to the choir, and that's why I love my students, because I get to talk with them and share with them. And the wonder of it all was that about 20% of my job was supposed to be service. So I'm going to be told you have to do service. Gee, too bad, right? And it was a gift of a platform from which I could practice my values. So at many turns throughout all this, I've wondered, what's my next direction going to be? And each time a door opened to me, and it was a door that was combined research with service, and of course then carries over to my teaching. I've ended up in Mexico, equivalent of several years of my life, research in Nicaragua, the UK, which is a hot seat for a basis for fair trade, Costa Rica, Cuba, Tanzania, Ecuador, and Guatemala. My most recent work has been in Ecuador and Guatemala. But Mexico is a place of my heart. And on occasion, it's literally taken to me a door, and I'll tell you that little story in about 2 or 3 minutes. So, Layla, I'd like to go to the slide photo of Oscar here, if you would please. This is my friend Oscar Santillán. I met Helen Slomovitz. She's a friend of everybody here, and as well as Laz. She introduced me to Oscar back around 2009, came and spoke for my students, my fair trade group, and he also gets involved in some microfinance projects. And the next year I heard he was in town. I called Helen and I said, hey, Helen, is there any chance I could meet with Oscar? And she said, I'm sorry, Paul, he's booked every night except Monday night. I'm going, Helen, that's the only night next week I'm open. So I came to Ann Arbor, took him out to dinner, and I said to Oscar, our indigenous friend, I really ought to get down to Ecuador to see what's going on in terms of fair trade and microfinance there. He said, well, come on down. I go, sure, okay. So I go to my finance chairperson, who is definitely not a fair trade grassroots person, and I figured at least I was going to maybe get a little partial funding. I walked out of his office about 15 minutes later, and he gave me full funding for the 3-week research project. Go figure, but thank you for opening the door. And I went down to Ecuador without a real itinerary, and that was the wonder of getting the funding. Because when you're dealing with someone from an indigenous culture, as I've spent much of my life doing that, you don't have the same kind of planning that we do. But oh my gosh, the experiences I had with Oscar. I can't tell you all, but I'll tell you one word. The word Yupachani, the primary language of northern Ecuador, is Quechua, and Yupachani is the most frequent word you'll hear. I've mentioned this because it's so fitting with Thanksgiving. It means thank you. Every conversation, Yupachani, even just a greeting, Yupachani neighbor. So that worked out. And Oscar and I have remained friends. He calls me the puente, a bridge between indigenous friends and the currents that flow in both directions. And Layla, let's move to the picture of the eagle and the condor, please. Thanks. A friend drew this for me, did this pencil and ink drawing for me. You've probably all heard, but I'll just remind you of the story of the eagle and the condor. And it's the teaching of indigenous people, not only my friends, the Maya in the Yucatan of Mexico, but also the folks of the Andes, the Quechua, that this is the time for the eagle and the condor to come together. The eagle being the United States. It's a bird of prey. It's a bird of strength. It's a materialistic bird. And the condor, which is a bird that cleans up the garbage. It's a bird that scavenges. But the time is for us to come together with our intellectualism and the heart and the concern for the environment of the condor. So I'm very honored that Oscar calls me that. I think we are bridges through each other. Oscar through me, through my students and community, I through him to his community and group, including some groups of young people. So next slide. Guatemala. Thank you. So, skipping way ahead, my work in Guatemala. That's been a great big spider web. In law school, I took a couple of environmental law classes from a guy named Zygmunt Platter, very active in the environmental community. He was only at Wayne for 2 years. I had the good fortune of working with him. People said, what are you taking those courses for? You won't use them. But of course I have. And we stayed in contact, and he had a student who was working down in Guatemala with a nonprofit group. So he says, David, call Stenzel. So David calls me, and he says, oh, you ought to get down there. So again, I got funding. I went down for a several-week research project, and that led me to a group called As Green as It Gets that works with microfinance and fair and direct trade. And this was just about the time that I, with a student, founded a group called Spartan Global Development Fund, and we do microfinance projects. Making small grants. It's not charity. It is a hand up. It's giving people access to economic opportunity they otherwise wouldn't have. And I can tell you lots of stories about, for example, get a loan in, my friend Oscar got a loan for a motorcycle. This is totally legal in Ecuador. Cost him $1,000 interest to pay back $1,000. So it's way all over 100% interest if you go to APR. This led to my students making loans through As Green as It Gets, this nonprofit in Guatemala. And it led to us taking 2 trips to Guatemala with the students to serve and get to know the folks to whom we make microloans. And this year, I turned it into an education abroad, service learning. The gentleman on the left, Leonzo Vasquez, is the head of a cooperative of 49 farmers. And we went down, and you see on the right-hand side was the closing day. We helped dig, shovel, mix cement, and took $5,000, made a loan of $5,000 to build a facility for drying and for processing of coffee beans. So, next slide, please, Lela. More community here in Guatemala. I took 13 students, and I'd like to just introduce you to how one thing leads to another. We are not a charity, but we made an exception this year with COVID. We learned that Guatemala was under a 4 p.m. to 4 a.m. lockdown. In fact, it is off and on in various municipalities still. These are some of our families. On the left, a gentleman named Francisco Zuniga and his wife Ofelia, dear friends of mine, dear souls. Don't think of this as charity. He's our dear friend. This man and his wife adopted 17 orphans in the 1990s who were orphaned by the violence promoted by the United States in Guatemala in the 80s and early 90s. The young woman in the middle, Angelica Hernandez and her husband, David, on the left, they're making these baskets. And they're baskets made from from Coke bottles and water bottles that are recycled. They're amazing. And she's teaching others to do them so that they can have livelihood. People who lost their homes 3 years ago when the volcano of the fire erupted. And on the right, 3 generations. In the middle, uh, Fidelina and her daughter behind her, Brenda, and Maybelline, the little girl in the front. We've made a microloan to help them with the restaurant. But we raised money and we got food to these folks. And even here from Interfaith, our Tuesday night group, the Sufi meditation, contributed enough for 6 baskets for a family of 4 for 2 weeks to help with this food drive. Well, we've ended that now, and we're back to our working out of microloans. One last slide of pictures of people. Tanzania. I want to back up just a little bit. More stories about doors opening. About 3 years ago, I had really internalized this thing. You sit back and you can kind of just wonder, hey, what's going to come next? This is going to be fun. And I literally remember sitting in my office at Epley Center at MSU. What am I going to do? And within that week, I got an email from Robbie Robertson, who works in Africa, in Tanzania, and several other projects. And he came to my office. He said, can I come to your office? I want to ask you something. He came to my office and said, would you be willing to go to Tanzania? We need somebody with expertise in microfinance because we're looking to see if we could do some group lending. Oh yeah, of course. So of course I went to Tanzania and again gained amazing insights on people from another culture. And then 2 days ago, on Friday of this week, we circle back. Last year I became involved in a group called Women Building Tanzania, and we're just in our fledgling, but it's got several projects, and one of them is linking women engineers, students from MSU, to women engineers at the University of Dar es Salaam. And the idea is to raise funds, and Spartan Global will come into play if we can raise some funds for it's down the road, probably won't happen for a couple of years, but we're building toward microloans to build some outhouses so that young women can stay in school, because when they get their periods, they can't stay in school because they don't have a discreet and clean place for the bathroom. So this is my new direction. And just one last little thing that ties in interfaith. The coordinator for our program mentioned to me, we're going to have to learn a lot more about Islam because nobody on our team knows anything about it. And I told her, you know what? I'm gifted. I got a tiny, tiny start here because of Interfaith, because of our Tuesday night sessions with Kamau. And in fact, Kamau has even come into my class this semester, helping my students learn about Islam and Sharia, and how Sharia is a very gentle and loving approach to humanity and to God, and not the horrors that we hear of the Taliban and of the Saudis and so forth. So at any rate, how incredibly lovely. There's another strand of the spider web of my life. So, a little wrap up. I've spoken at churches and once in a synagogue on ways to serve others through fair trade. And you folks get it, they get it. Frequently, I speak at business law conferences. And after presentations, it has been amazing to me that on numerous occasions, people have come up to me and said something like, I can see this as a spiritual pursuit for you. Until 2 professors said that to me about 20 years ago, I hadn't realized it. So, increasingly, I have felt that, and I hope that I can continue to listen and wait for the doors to open as we go through. So to wrap it up, if we could go to the closing slide that has a picture of some words of thanks, Layla, please. In this time of transition, the micro, there have been some amazing synergies and ripple effects for me. As I move on directions, in practical terms, I wonder what my next project will be, but when I float and let the door open, it works. And on the macro, for all of us, it's this big spider web as we move into a new world, as we deal with the pandemic, as we deal with Black Lives Matter, the need to honor that movement, climate change, economic inequities, as Mary Alice said. Mary Alice, your reading today was absolutely perfect. I'm sitting there going, yes, yes, yes. So at any rate, all of us have been, and I'm sure we will continue to make it a different world by serving others, and we can make it a different world instead of returning to the inequities. So on this last slide, I just wanted to share with you a few words that have come from my life. Gratitude, of course, in English. Gracias in Spanish, which it translated means many graces, and I love that translation. Dios poetic it is a word from a Mayan dialect of the Yucatan where I have done work, and then Yupaychani, which I've taught you. These pictures are among my friends of a little village called, oh dear, my mind just blanked. A little village in the high mountains of Chiapas, Mexico, where I've done research and where, if any of you buy Higher Grounds coffee, their coffee comes from there. The gentleman in the upper left-hand corner, Juan is we have a a friendship that, and having met, and I've spent some time with his family, and I've seen him when he's come to the U.S. He's one of the co-founders of a cooperative of over 200 and some farmers who sell their coffee through higher grounds, cooperative coffees and Higher Grounds. So, at any rate, gracias, Tiswawotik and Yupachani. And in closing, I know that the other day Annie closed by saying, now you get to finish what I started. Well, I know all of you started before I said these words, and I know you'll continue. But here's one last little demonstration. Everything has a story. One of the saddest things for me being on Zoom all the time with my students is I can't use this because this has been in the hands of thousands of people whenever I give a talk. So it's the talking stick. There's a story on this one, but I won't take time for it. But if anybody, as you speak today, imagine you're one of the holders of this talking stick that's been in the hands of thousands of people across the world in England, the Netherlands, Guatemala, Cuba, Tanzania. Wherever I've been, this baby's gone with me, and it barely fits in my suitcase. So thank you all.